David and Jesse, for having me today. So I just recently joined SFA Oxford. SFA Oxford is a consulting analyst group. It's based in the UK. I'm based in Toronto. And the company actually made its mark with PGMs and the hydrogen market. And so the company has started to look at lithium, cobalt, and nickel. And with my help, hopefully we'll be handling a lot more battery materials moving forward. So thank you very much. And sorry. There you go. Okay, so we all know about, obviously there were over 20 million battery electric vehicles that were sold in 2022. There's just onwards and upwards, and we're at this level where we're going to probably see a doubling pretty shortly and break 20 million units by 2026. And so this is pretty amazing. And while most automakers will use LFP, this is mainly in China. Okay, so one of the things that I've heard so many times is that battery chemistry moves quickly. It actually doesn't move very quickly. So once a recipe is basically worked out and it's efficient and the cells are produced efficiently, you can expect that chemistry will be used for the design life of the vehicle. Just to give you an example, it's just way back when the Tesla Model 3 was coming out, they had actually reduced the cobalt content in the battery. They had to rewrite everything. They had to rewrite the battery management system. That was part of their whole production delays. So even a tweak is never a tweak in battery chemistry world. Once you get the recipe right, that's the recipe for at least the design life of that vehicle. And of these chemistries that are listed below, NMC, LFP, NCA, they've been around for a very long time. The newest chemistry is NMCA. So it's just a tweak. And this is what GM is using. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of people, they'll say, like, I was at the International Battery Conference a couple of months ago, and we're all talking about next generation battery technologies and different types of elements. And this is basically benchmark to automobiles. It's a very precarious process. It takes a very long time. And automakers are not going to take on a chemistry above and beyond of what they know, and they know is safe, and they understand it. So this is what you always have to remember. So going backwards is that even though LFP is definitely resurging and gaining ground, the history of LFP is kind of interesting. It was invented at the University of Texas. It was basically grown up in Quebec, and it was Quebec was one of the key patent holders, and then China sort of took it over. And the reason why was just because of the low energy density. So we have all of the knowledge. We have a lot of chemists here in Quebec that can handle LFP. However, the automotive industry in the US, mainly nickel based. So this is why we're going to focus on nickel today. So back to the IRA. This is the big problem with a lot of the announcements that have been made, and I'm going to show you a lot of maps later on just to see how big and all the planned gigafactory capacity is going to come on board. Is basically, the bipartisan infrastructure bill did cause a lot of that acceleration, but then the IRA obviously, put the pedal to the metal. It's just been going gangbusters. And my maps that I have that I'm going to show you, they're probably outdated because there's probably some announcement that I missed over the weekend. So the Inflation Reduction Act, very, very big. The problem is that in order to get the investment tax credit, which is $7,500, it's a very complicated thing to actually get it. You have to have an income level, you have to wait for the next year, you have to put it on your taxes, and before, GM and Tesla were no longer eligible for these tax credits. Now you have to have certain critical minerals that are brought in from free trade partners or from domestically, and all of the vehicles have to be assembled in North America. So this is great for Canada because we're already a free trading partner. But when push came to shove on tax day, which was I think April 14th or the 16th, only 10 vehicles qualified. So there's 60 vehicles available for purchase in the US. Only 10 vehicles qualify for the investment tax credit. For the EV tax credit. So we have a lot of work to do. We just have a lot of work to do. When you look at nickel, US has only one domestic mine that's in operation. It's expected to be decommissioned in 2025. The Talon Rio Tinto mine in Minnesota, that's developing. They're hoping to supply 75,000 metric tons in nickel and concentrate to Tesla. So this is what's going on as well, is that automakers are going directly to the mine to secure supply chains. Tesla is a company that actually does a lot of as you know, you've heard in the papers, they do all of the battery cell lines. That's all of theirs. They really focus on controlling a lot of their supply chain. So this is not surprising, and this is in line with what Tesla's doing. GM is doing the same thing. What we do see is there's absolutely no nickel sulfate production. So it's a precursor that goes into the cathode itself. And so Vale is planning to build a nickel processing plant in Bécancour, which is called, we call it Quebec's Battery Alley, just so people don't have to pronounce the French Bécancour, and yeah, they understand it. So this is a huge problem. And if you look at nickel sulfate, China doesn't produce that much compared to the other elements to the battery value chain. So basically, what we think is the impact of the IRA and the overall picture is basically that we see like a change in battery. We see a huge uptick in EV battery production in North America. So this is creating a complicated picture, because the OEMs want to, in order to sell these vehicles at a premium, they have to either bring the price down and take a loss, or they have to promote the fact that they're going to get this EV tax credit, like the $7,500. So this is what they're doing, because margins are very, very thin in the automotive industry. And so what we've got going is that, the investments in North America, they could be capped, especially with, we're going to see when we have the free trade agreement countries, that's fine, but we need to have like agreements with other countries that are separate. And so what we're seeing is that, Japan recently signed a trade deal in battery metals, and we're going to see the same thing with the EU. The EU's they're in conversation. We're likely going to see that as well, and most likely with Germany. But China companies are not necessarily locked out of the US IRA, because Ford has been licensing technology from CATL. CATL is having a very difficult time to have a North American presence. So what they're doing, Ford decided to do, is that they're going to take their LFP technology and bring that to the United States. We don't know if that's going to happen or not. We don't know if it's going to pass the Congress or those regulatory hurdles that they have to go through. But there is a lot of talk with foreign countries about how to circumvent this foreign entities of concern clause. So it's going to be a really exciting summer, I think. So again, what we see is that, even though there's a rise of LFP, and yes, LFP will be established in the US, the US DOE has made that as a primary goal. Nickel, particularly nickel, cobalt, and manganese, these are going to be the dominant battery type in North America and in Europe. This is what they know. This is how they've developed their cell lines. And so we've got, like I said, we've got NCA with Tesla. Tesla has been able to perfect the LFP chemistry in China. So they will be bringing that here. So then you can actually say that NCA and LFP will be half and half, but then it'll be nickel, high nickel. Again, nickel, net import dependence of critical energy transition materials is going to be, basically right now it's from Canada, Norway, Australia, and Finland, And Canada and Australia are the two that already have a free trade agreement in place. So what's going on globally? Last year, what happened was basically that we've had a rise of LFP. It's growing quite rapidly in China. So remember China, and it hasn't impacted nickel-based chemistries as much as we thought. It has obviously impacted cobalt demand, just for the simple reason is that because the industry has been trying to reduce cobalt demand at an aggressive pace, but it'll still be needed. Even though zero cobalt NMC cathodes are going to need 2 to 5% cobalt, whether it's in the cathode itself or whether it's in the processing and synthesis of these cathodes. This is because cobalt has this amazing quality of taming nickel and making sure that it doesn't compete with lithium in the battery chemistry. And so cobalt's there to just keep it tame. And if you actually increase nickel and decrease cobalt content, you see that there's definitely some erosion. And what that happens is that there's loss of life cycle. It doesn't work as well. It causes battery fires. It also basically it reduces the longevity of the battery, and this is not what you want. So you want you always want a long-standing battery that doesn't go into thermal runaway, that doesn't cause any problems and doesn't cause a battery fire. So this is what OEMs want. So here you go. This is my first slide. These are all of the downstream projects that have been announced. You can see right now that Tennessee seems to be one of the main recipients, and this is primarily because they have hydroelectric power, not similar to Quebec, obviously, because Quebec's very unique, but that's one of the reasons why is decarbonized power. So that's also and cheap energy. So this is cheap decarbonized power, and obviously a good business. A state or a province that wants to bring these businesses to them. Oak Ridge National Labs is actually right in Tennessee too. So this is actually can attract a lot of the talent and everything like that. So that's actually been very, very interesting. Michigan for obvious reasons, but the rest is sort of scattered. But this is like, I'm sure that this slide has been already outdated because I'm sure that there was an announcement over the weekend that I didn't see. And so here we go. So here's the upstream and midstream projects. Just wanted to point out that Jervois, they were in the process of building a Sol cobalt mine in Idaho, and they actually stopped abruptly. So they halted development. This was very interesting, is because they just said that they just gave the reason that the cobalt prices had come down. So this is what everybody is dealing with, is that you're trying to build a mine based on sometimes very short-term price fluctuations, and we're going to have to really start to take a long-term view about how to develop these projects, because you're going to need in order to especially by 2029, in order to receive the EV tax credit from the federal level. I mean, there are certain states that actually have other incentives in place, but in order to receive that, you're going to have like 80 to 100% of the materials coming from North America or free trading partners. So there's not a lot of mine development. There's not a lot of mine. There's nothing for manganese. So basically, NMC is the top chemistry. Nickel, okay. Manganese, none. No manganese. Processing in North America. Cobalt, they tried to open up a cobalt mine, and it actually just got closed down and just halted for no reason. So one of the main problems with the IRA is that I feel like they're giving a lot of money to obviously graphite, lithium. That's the good part of it. The other part is giving money to next generation technologies, and they really have to focus on doing what is now. Like the US DOE has to start investing and making sure that these mining operations and precursor plants in North America come on board. You want to have, when you talk about localization, we've talked about that a lot. So you basically want the processing and of the precursor plant near the mine. You also probably want recycling near the mine too, as well, so that it's near the precursor plant. So you want to have that localization. You want to have that control. That's what you're looking for. OEMs want to have their cell manufacturing near them. So automakers want to have them near them. So like Michigan, for example, if you're going backwards, Michigan has a lot of development because it has an established auto sector. They're retooling plants. It's an obvious place. However, Tennessee is also having upstream and downstream. So this is very, very interesting to see these patterns emerge. And so when you look at us, this is pretty incredible. Like, look what's happening in Quebec, look what's happening in Ontario. So this is actually, Ontario is the third largest, jurisdiction for assembling vehicles in North America. And then you've got Hydro-Quebec with its cheap hydropower, with its, skills. Their education system is, I grew up in Quebec, and I live in Ontario, so I know very much about the pros and cons of both education system. And in Quebec, I was able to move into my my chemistry degree fairly easily because I was fairly prepared versus people in Ontario. And so they have a very big skill set. They have a lot of knowledge. Like I said, they've developed LFP, and they had the patent. Hydro-Quebec had the patent, so they were actually looking at this for many, many, many years. So this is a huge competitive advantage that we have. So the bad news is that we have all this potential. However, Indonesia. So Indonesia, the Chinese government. So Indonesia, they basically had an export ban for nickel raw materials, and long story short, they use this technology called HPAL to make class 2 nickel into class 1 battery grade nickel. And for a long time, the industry, we all thought this was never going to happen. And it did happen. But it's highly polluting. It's basically what's going on. There's going to be, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more articles about the pollution problem in Indonesia. But this is the biggest competition coming online. And they're also, so for 2021, they had very nominal cobalt, because nickel and cobalt are mined together here. And they jumped up to second place. So we actually, at SFA Oxford, we actually think that by 2025, it could actually go up to 24 kilotons of cobalt as well. So this is what's going on. These are all new projects that are coming on board. There's 3 already, and this is definitely going to be a formidable competition. The issue is that for the United States, they don't have friendliest trading, partnerships. And there's been, over the last couple of weeks, there's been some articles saying that the Indonesian government wants to approach the U.S. and start talks about supplying nickel to U.S. OEMs. So that's pretty. So that means that what that means is that this is the market. Nickel's a star ingredient. We need to start developing this industry at home in North America, and we need to start with, one of the things that I like to say is that, out of all of the elements that are part of that are being the precursors that are being developed in China, nickel is the only one that we actually have an opportunity to start to. So we need some precursor plants, and so the first one obviously is Vale in Battery Valley. So again, so this slide should have probably been a little bit more forward, but just to remember that battery grade nickel, it has to be from class 1 nickel. And in Canada and in the Northern Hemisphere, that usually came from nickel sulfides. And so now, in Indonesia and along the equator and in the Southern Hemisphere, it's mostly this laterites. And so you need this very, very toxic way of producing class 1 minerals. And domestic extraction, continues to be difficult. And I was actually surprised to learn this when I actually put the slide together, that it was actually more difficult than it was in Australia and Canada. So here we go. So this is what it looks like. So New Caledonia, the Philippines, as well as the Cuba. These were all they've already established turning in class 1 battery grade nickel from laterites. And what we also need is probably more exploration in sulfides, because this is definitely a better supply outlook, let's just say. And so again, this drives the point home, is that in the USA, we're seeing a very, very huge decline in mining production of nickel. And Canada's relatively flat. So the problem is, again, another problem is that a lot of the nickel mining companies, they have very high risk ESG scores. This is definitely something, this data is from Sustainalytics. Each provider has their own way of assessing this, and so there's definitely there's not a lot of homogeneity in these ratings, but I just chose Sustainalytics because they had the most companies from this list. And you can see that that these most of them have very, very high risk scores. And so the problem is with this is that the financial community are now having to provide ESG ratings on all of these companies. And a lot of buy side clients and huge investors will have their own elements of ESG and how they're going to apply ESG and to their investment decisions, and it differs from case to case. So what this means is that Anglo American, for example, it's medium risk, may be okay for one company, but it may not be for another company. And so this actually impacts their ability to raise money and at a very low cost of capital. So this is definitely something that needs to be worked out as well. And so if you're basically mining in Quebec with low hydroelectric power, decarbonized, then you're already ahead of the game. You're already ahead of the game here. Okay, and then going back to what I said before between laterites and sulfides, and where the long-term successful HPAL projects were in these countries, and there are many high-profile failures. So this is a very, very complicated process, but Indonesia has it right. However, they're not going to meet at this point, they're not going to meet that ESG standard. So what about LFP? So this is a slide that I put in at the last minute. I presented this at the International Battery Conference, and I just wanted to say that this is great. LFP is a great product. I always loved it when I started in researching this field. I always said that LFP was going to make a comeback, and it's one of the things is that it's just pretty safe. It's pretty easy to make. It's not that hard. But the patent position was very difficult, and also the energy density was pretty low. But phosphorus supply chains may not be as resilient as we think. Like, it may be ubiquitous, but it may not be resilient as you think. And when I said that, two chemists in the audience clapped their hands and said, "Finally, someone's saying this." Because when phosphorus supply chains are used for food, and then all of a sudden you're using it for energy, clean energy, like, that could be a geopolitical mess. And so this is something that you always have to think about, is that scientists they didn't really understand commodities. And when I spoke at this type of venue there, where we're talking about commodities and the supply and demand and everything like that, there was usually a pretty empty room, because the scientists were always in the other rooms trying to learn and how to improve their own technology. Well, this last March, it was packed. It was packed. They all want to know. They want to know that what they're doing at the benchtop level, that there's going to be some supply later on. So just wanted to say that there's, even though there's a moat between policymakers, for information moat between policymakers, automakers, battery chemists, and the mining community, this is becoming more truncated. And I think people are realizing that now OEMs now need to start talking to miners, and we also need to start investing in these precursor development in North America. Thanks.